White Plantation of 98. Ehud Barak's government failed after Camp David in 2000. Ariel Sharon had a massive stroke after he agreed to giving up land in Gaza and northern Samaria. And Ehud Olmert, just about the time he was ready to give up 95% of Judea and Samaria, East Jerusalem to the Palestinians, and even was considering giving up sovereignty over the holy sites of Jerusalem, which Barak refused to give Arafat, he was under indictment. Stopped in his tracks. And then we have every other American president. I'll go through a couple here just to give you a summary. Franklin Delano Roosevelt wrote a letter to the king of Saudi Arabia saying if Israel ever wanted to become a state, he would be contacted immediately. 1 week from sending that letter, he died in office, replaced by Harry Truman, who made sure Israel became a state. A very significant vote. John Kennedy wanted to stop Israel from going nuclear. He wanted oversight over Israel's nuclear plans. He backed off a little bit because he wanted the Jewish vote, Jewish influence in the upcoming election. Ben-Gurion stepped down, replaced by Levi Eshkol, and then tragically John Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Replaced by Lyndon Johnson, and some people to this day believe that Lyndon Johnson was the best friend that Israel's ever had in the White House. And because of Lyndon Johnson's help and oversight during 1967, Israel was successful in their Six-Day War. Richard Nixon's peace efforts stopped by Watergate. Gerald Ford's peace efforts were stopped by a lost election in a horribly run campaign. Jimmy Carter was able to get an agreement out of Camp David, and after the agreement was signed, his presidency went straight downhill, and for all practical purposes, for 20 years, his political party acted as if he wasn't a member of the Democratic Party. Ronald Reagan, who's read David Hawking's book on Ezekiel and who had a great interest in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and Reagan used to talk about it. And his members in the cabinet would try to change the subject, but he was so fascinated by it. And isn't it interesting that he had this heart for Ezekiel 38 and 39, and because of his desire to see the Iron Curtain come down and to see Russia liberated, that 1 million Jews were able to move out of the nation of Israel, to the nation of Israel. And the gospel was allowed to be spread throughout Russia. Very significant role. But Reagan was convinced by Perez of Israel and Arafat that they were serious about peace, reluctantly moved into some kind of peace meetings, and the Iran-Contra scandal stopped the Reagan administration's peace efforts. And then George Bush went from having the highest approval rating in history at 91% to sponsoring the Land for Peace conference in Madrid, Spain. At the time he was calling on Israel to give up their land, the perfect storm was sending 35-foot waves into his home in Kennebunkport, Maine. Not a week later, not a month later, not 6 months later, as he's at a podium in Madrid, waves are crashing into his home. And we did a special in the 700 Club with the speech and then his survey of the damage. That was his next official business after Madrid, is go see what the $1 million worth of damage looked like in his home in Maine. Bill Clinton's major scandals all broke at the time. His couple major scandals broke at the time he was pressuring Israel the greatest. The Lewinsky case broke with Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House. Not a week later, not a month later, that night. The Chinese espionage scandal broke later that year in May, at the very time he and Gore and Madeleine Albright were pressuring Israel to comply. So for 12 days, the Clinton administration is pressuring Netanyahu. It's on the front page of many newspapers, and right next to it was Clinton rebounding from this Chinese espionage scandal. For 12 days, both articles on the front page of many newspapers, not only in America, but around the world. And they go on and on and on. And then George W. Bush reluctantly wanted to get involved in the peace process. He did not want to get involved, but he reluctantly went forward after 75 days in office. I can tell you the first 75 days could not have gone smoother for him. That was the best days he had in his entire administration. Because he brought the people home from Israel. He says, I'm not interested in active involvement in the peace process. But he was convinced by Jordan's leader, Abdullah, involved in the peace process. And he got involved, and it affected everything from that point forward. I have a friend that's a Catholic that I've been sharing some prophecy with at the White House over the years. 30 years a White House correspondent. And she said that 9/11 and Katrina completely disrupted President George W. Bush's plans for his administration. And both of them have a connection to the land of Israel. President Bush would like to see Israel live in peace and security. 88% of the Israelis appreciate him and believe that he wanted Israel's best, and I believe that too. But I wrote letters to him and I told him that the land is not to be divided. And right after the Katrina event, my second book went into his office, and from that point forward, he said again, we will not pressure Israel to divide their land. And from that point forward, from 2006 to the time he got out of office, he would constantly say, we're not going to pressure Israel to do what they don't want to do. But nonetheless, Condoleezza Rice and the international community kept pushing forward, and it's created a lot of problems for the United States as well as the international community. And now Barack Obama started off with settlement discussion and dividing Jerusalem. That was the first two things they talked about. Hillary Clinton says, let's freeze all settlements. And Rahm Emanuel says, let's deal with the matters of Jerusalem now. Couldn't have been the worst possible things for them to start with. And God had a plan. He still has a plan. It's all coming together. But we all know that Jerusalem and Israel is God's time clock. We know the eyes of the world are on the city of Jerusalem. We know that there's a plan to divide the city. But we also know the promised land is not to be divided. And the Bible said that there would be consequences to those who attempt to divide the land of Israel. In Joel 3:2 and Zechariah. The promised land here is the Euphrates River on the east, goes through Iraq, parts of Saudi Arabia, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and parts of Egypt. This is the promised land. Today, Israel's only on 23% of the promised land. And it depends on what scholar you speak to. Some Bible scholars believe at some point Israel will occupy before Yeshua returns to Jerusalem. And others believe that it won't be fully occupied until Yeshua returns. The false Messiah will come forward with a peace plan. And he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. We know Daniel 2:27 talks about the 70th week. And we also know right now we have the international community working, the quartet, the EU, the UN, US, and Russia has put their plan on the table. So we have the world's powers all agreeing now to the division of the land based on UN Resolution 242. And they agree that the city of Jerusalem needs to be divided. But Zechariah 12:3 talks about the time where Jerusalem will become a burdensome stone. It's coming now. It is now. And Zechariah 12:9 talks about the time when the nations and the armies of the world will come against Jerusalem. And God will destroy them. Is this the Daniel 9:27 configuration? There is a good chance, I should probably put it this way, there is an improving chance that we could possibly see a covenant or an agreement this year. Will it be Daniel 9:27? I don't know. We are certainly going to watch. But in the last 6 months, the United States, Israel, the Arab League, and others, and members of the EU are prepared to move forward to an agreement. And what is beginning to evolve, and this could very possibly be the parameters of 927, is define boundaries. Even Netanyahu said this a couple weeks ago. Define boundaries. Bush attempted before they got out of office. But let's agree to the boundaries. Is that giving them 94 or 96% of Judea and Samaria? But there's also a possibility that there could be an agreement but no actual land transferred, or the possibility of very little. And it could be based on contingencies and phase-ins, just like the quartet roadmap that's on the table from April 30, 2003. It has phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Because